I'm Mark Golub, and still in the news, the controversy surrounding the Iran nuclear accord, in which Iran agrees to ramp down its nuclear program. And the United States, with the other nations in the P5+1, agree to lift the economic and diplomatic sanctions on Iran. And to be sure, in the Jewish community, there remains people who feel passionately supportive of the deal and who oppose the deal. Americans as a whole now seem to be against the deal. Roughly 70% of Americans oppose the deal. But American Jews, according to a poll conducted by Dr. Stephen Cohen of HUCJAR, despite their misgivings, a majority of American Jews seem to support the deal. According to Stephen Cohen, 53% of American Jews support the deal, while only 35% oppose it. But the issue is far from decided. On Wednesday, for example, we spoke with David Harris, the executive director of the American Jewish Committee, who explained why the AJC has come out with a dramatic critique of the Iran deal and is calling for all Americans to lobby their congressional legislators to block passage of the Iran deal. The AJC is a highly regarded centrist Jewish organization, pro-Israel to be sure, and it carries a great deal of weight among many American Jews. It's no small thing for the AJC to come out so publicly against the deal. AIPAC is another major Jewish force on the American Jewish scene. It normally does not take policy positions, but AIPAC has come out against the deal and is lobbying legislators to vote against it in Congress. So it's no surprise that the American administration has gone out of its way to lobby on its own behalf American Jewish leadership. And this past Tuesday, August 4th, the president invited a formidable group of select Jewish leaders to the White House for a 2-hour meeting and discussion trying to allay Jewish concerns and win Jewish support for the Iran nuclear accord. One of the participants at that White House meeting is a leading figure on the American and world Jewish scene, and I'm so pleased to say you hear him very often, you see him very often here on JBS. Malcolm Hoenlein, Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. Malcolm, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Oh, it's always my pleasure. And, I agree with you. I think the committee statement, like many others coming from federations and organizations across the country, are quite significant, are very significant.
Yes, by the way, Malcolm, the Conference of Presidents has also come out against the deal. But I want you to talk for one moment. I want you to the extent to which you are able to do so. When I heard you were at this meeting, I couldn't wait to ask you, what was it like to be, in the White House for this specific meeting? Malcolm, I understand it was more than a 2-hour meeting. Tell me as much as you can about the tone and substance of that meeting.
So it was a 2.5-hour meeting, and I will say that I've had dozens and dozens of meetings with presidents over the last 4 decades. This was truly unique in that respect, both in terms of the length, but also in terms of the intensity. It was quite emotional, and the president opened with a 45-minute, perhaps maybe it was longer, I don't know, but a very long opening discussion, a monologue about the deal, about the content of the deal, about some of the issues that have arisen, his concerns. He had no notes. He just did this off the cuff. He has great command on the deal and about the issues around it. We then engaged in about an hour and a half of questions and answers, and some of it very intense, I would say. And while it was an off-the-record meeting, and therefore we don't discuss what the president says or the content, but it dealt with the question of some of the characterizations of the Jewish community that come from officials, and characterization of those who oppose the deal as being, for war. And we made clear that that was not the case, that you can have differences of view. We agree on the goal. Everybody shares the goal of seeing a nuclear-free Iran. nuclear weapons for Iran at least, and that the way you get there can be different, but it's not because of human war. It's absolutely because we want peace. We want a real peace. That there are those who feel very strongly against this deal because they do not believe that it will ultimately lead to that,
yes.
and that there can be a legitimate debate, and that we have sought not to personalize or politicize this discussion. We've worked hard at that.
Yes.
We believe that that is an important principle.
Malcolm, I understand that there are times when the president is going to call people of your ilk, your leadership stature. You go to the White House and it's off the record. I don't understand why, this being such a volatile public issue, why a meeting that the president has with some 20, 25 major Jewish leaders, select Jewish leaders, but there was a nice cross-section of you there, why that should be in any way off the record. Can you explain that to me?
It was their request that it be off the record.
Yeah, why?
I would not have minded, because people are more open, and because the president wants to be able to speak freely. I mean, this is not the first president, President Bush, President Clinton. We had many off-the-record meetings. The vast majority of the meetings are off the record.
I understand.
It doesn't mean that they don't make it into the press. It just means that is the ground rules for the meeting. Right. And I think it's important that people honor it, because we want to have this as an ongoing dialogue and opportunities to discuss this and other things in the future, that the president will feel that he can be open with us. And when you're on the record, people are much more cautious, and people don't necessarily rebut and answer and say things that for fear that it will be misquoted or misattributed.
Okay, I'll say it again. In general, I'm very respectful of off the record. For this issue, given where we are in time, and given that the president convenes a group of Jewish policymakers, the notion that he would say something to you that you could then not tell us offends me. And maybe you think I'm being, you know me. I generally never go here. But in this issue, Malcolm, I wanted you to be able to say to me, the president made a very strong case, but there were a couple of us who said X, Y, and Z, and his response was, the following. And it's important, it seems to me, Malcolm, that the Jewish community, and this is not just a Jewish issue, all of America, either hears something from the administration that changes their mind and wins them over, or ultimately they have a sense that people like you have been able to express the opposition, the opposing view, in a coherent and articulate way. And I want to know whether, anyway, that's my concern. I'll ask the question this way. Was the president in any way persuasive to you, Malcolm?
Look, I have studied this very closely. I've been working on it, for many years on the issue of Iran, and on this particular deal since it was made public, since we were able to read it for the first time. So I am very familiar with it. And we've had many meetings, as you know. We hosted Secretary Kerry. We had a school with Biden. We hosted the Prime Minister for a webinar together with JFNA that brought 14,000 people together.
Yes, and we broadcast it live on JBS.
General Yadlin.
Yes.
So we have really been examining this. Plus, we have a very high-level working group that brings the best experts together in Washington. We have taken a sophisticated, serious approach. This is not knee-jerk reaction. This is not just based on emotion. Because you have to be factual. You have to convince the American people. And in order to do that, you have to do it on the basis of facts and not things that appear mercurial or that change. And one of the problems has been that too many of the things that were promised, too many of the red lines have become pink lines and then no lines, and that things we were told were in the deal were not, or were interpreted differently, even on the 8-year and 5-year, which you and I talked about when we discussed the deal initially, and we were told that there was a 5-year moratorium on conventional weapons, 8 years on ballistic missile parts.
Right.
And then we find out that, in fact, it's not in the JPOA, it's in the UN Security Council resolution, and there isn't, if you read the fine print, which I actually did and brought this to people's attention because I couldn't believe it when I read it, and that is that if Iran is found in compliance, which it will be, they will comply with this deal by and large in the beginning, as long as it serves their purpose. Why? Because they want to get the money and they want to get all of these restrictions off. If they're found to be in compliance by the IEA, then these two restrictions can be removed much earlier. So we won't even get the 5 and 8 years on these things. I cited as one example, but there are many things here, and you could say they're subject to interpretation, and that people will read the same thing different ways. But the question here, it's not based on trust. The president himself acknowledged that Iran is not a good player, that Iran is not trustworthy. We know who we're dealing with, and the concern, and there's no difference in evaluating what they've said. Just look at what the guy has said, what Khomeini has said in his new book on Palestine, and his repeated calls to destroy America, destroy Israel, his threats to build up Hamas, Hezbollah, and the president gets pressed then on the question of, well, what's going to happen with the money? How are you going to control the funds going to these entities, and what sanctions and what operations will be put in place? Because we know that minor violations are not going to be responded to. They're not going to risk the deal because the Iranians said, oh, if you impose any sanctions, we're out of it. We're going to walk away. And they said then they'll have a nuclear weapon, and everybody's going to come to us and say the deal broke, and now they're going to be racing towards a nuclear weapon. Because none of the infrastructure was, in fact, dismantled. Some of it was mothballed, and it's supposed to be under IA inspections at Fordow, at Natanz, and others. But we don't know about facilities. We don't know about how much they will keep to this, and how they will certainly try to cheat on the edges. And as Ali Hoenlein has said, if they're not cheating, it's the first time in 30 years that would be true.
Yes.
So your point, I concur with your point. This is an issue of such vital significance. I think that there should be complete transparency. People, should be able to know and hear and evaluate and make judgments. I think it's very important that the rhetoric not lose sight of the substance, and we've tried to keep the focus on substance. As you heard with the explanation of the committee votes on other people who have been on the show, there are real issues here. These are life and death issues ultimately, because you're dealing with a country that is seeking hegemony in the region, that is the major world sponsor of terrorism in the world. They're back Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, and many others. They seek to undermine the other governments in the region. They are expanding greatly their efforts in South America, where Iran has 40,000 agents, according to a recent report, revelation, and has huge numbers of cultural centers, more than 80 that they opened recently, as a base of operation against us. So none of this is hypothetical.
Okay.
This is all real and immediate.
I understand. Malcolm, I want you to answer my question. Did the president convince you? Did he persuade you? Did he say anything that moved you? And the question that's going to follow is, do you think anything that somebody like you or the other people there who agree with your position, if he didn't move you, do you feel you were able to move him?
Look, I always go into a meeting, at least with my mind open to hear what they have to say, that if somebody has a good argument and a good issue, and he obviously placed before us his perception of the deal and put forward arguments, including about what will happen if it gets defeated, and implicit in some of it were threats about, the ramifications of this for the nuclear program, etc. And of course, our concern about how the U.S.-Israel relationship will emerge after all of this, and the tensions between the president and the prime minister, which he addressed very fully. So I did hear those things, and I take them seriously, and I have to think about what we can do to ameliorate it and how we can help. Where I think we may have convinced him was about the issue of how he characterizes the opposition. And in his speech yesterday, he was very tough again and very strong on the issue, but he did not make the same reference to the organizations, the lobbying effort, the lobbyists versus this, etc. He did speak about against Netanyahu very strongly and Israel's isolation, when in fact we know that the Arab countries in the region are very unhappy with this deal. We know many others are unhappy, but the bandwagon effect is operative, and we know what they say privately, and lately the Saudis, UAE, others made more positive statements. But we know that they're very much against this deal, and the president acknowledged that earlier.
I can't tell whether, in essence, while I felt it was important that this meeting take place, it was an exercise in futility because people went into the meeting with a certain perspective. They got a chance to talk with each other, and there may have been some side issues clarified. But I don't think, Malcolm, and you correct me if I'm wrong, and again, I agree with you, there is no more important issue at the moment confronting not simply the Jewish community, but the world. I don't understand why Americans in general, and maybe Americans in general do get it, but every now and then I fear that Americans don't understand it's not simply Israel. Iran is not building intercontinental ballistic missiles to hit Israel. They're doing it to hit Washington, D.C. and New York and St. Louis and Chicago and Boston. And, 10 and 15 years, Malcolm, goes by in an eye blink. Anyway, my sense is you went to this meeting because it was the appropriate thing for you to do. You sat at the meeting for 2.5 hours. It's so interesting to hear you say that the president spoke for 45 minutes extemporaneously and passionately. And then you have this give and take. And I see, by the way, there are people at this meeting, Jeremy Ben-Ami is there, and there's another representative from J Street. And they have a very different view than mainstream American Jewry. And at the end of the day, you got up and you walked out. And my sense is that, again, if I was walking out with you, I would have said, Malcolm, sort of, what was the point? Because ultimately all we did was hear the president tell us how much he thought the deal was a good deal. And we got to tell him, or those many in the room got to explain to him why the U.S. had said it was going to dismantle Iran's nuclear program. And then the deal changed. And now it's just softening the program, and that there's no question that whether Iran does or does not abide by the deal. If it does abide by the deal, I think everybody should have heard you. Yes, Iran's likely to abide by this deal very carefully for the first number of years. But 10 or 15 years out, Malcolm, we're going to be in the same predicament, but in a worse negotiating position and a worse military position. And that I'm assuming you came out of that meeting very disappointed. If I'm wrong, tell me.
Well, you can only be disappointed if you have different expectations. First of all, this was an invitation from the president. It was his initiative, and anytime we have a chance to have a dialogue with the president of the United States, I think you take it. I think you hope for exactly what you said, that perhaps something you say or points we raise will be heard, just as he hopes that by the things he says that we will be heard. I will tell you that I would never respond to a threat or to some sort of intimation that about consequences for the community and stuff. And I'm not saying the president did this. I'm saying I would not. I will never respond to that kind of thing. I will listen if somebody can make a cogent argument that it's something we have to consider. And I believe it's our responsibility if we are to convince people and bring people along. You said something before, which has been my mantra, as you know, from the beginning, and trying to get everybody not to make it Israel-centric and not to make it about Jews. That this is an American danger.
Yes.
It's not just the ballistic missiles, the terrorist network, the other things. They have shown how many Marines that they killed, how many Americans they have killed through terrorism that they sponsor. Second of all, the polls show that overwhelmingly the American people get it. Despite all the rhetoric and distortions, they get it. They know this is a bad deal. They know Iran is a bad actor. They're not happy with it. They don't feel the safeguards that many of the things they were told, that Iraq would be dismantled, that Fordo would be dismantled, 0 centrifuges, then 1,000, and now, 6,000. And others are there, and they can still do R&D on the IR 6, 7, 8 centrifuges. It's not that there's nothing good in this deal. Of course there are good. But the feeling is that it should have been a lot better, and that the safeguards, and as you said, it's not just 10 or 15 years, and 8 years already that things will start dissipating, and they will hold this as long as it's in their interest to keep the deal. And they will keep it as long, but they can make so much more progress, even R&D on ballistic missiles, not covered, ballistic missiles at all, terrorism, not covered. All the other things that they're engaged in are not covered in this deal. So the concerns that people raise and why the American people, by such big margins, are seeing through this. And there, as you cited, there was a poll that was done in L.A., but we see other polls that show the Jewish community following the same pattern as the general American populace. They understand the consequences. They see the danger that this poses, certainly because we're concerned about Israel, but we're also concerned about what this means to the world, to America. Yes. What does it mean to Europe, where they can hit today with their ballistic missiles? They don't need the nuclear weapon. They need to be close to it in order to have the intimidation, to start the arms race that we're going to see in the Middle East. Billions and billions of dollars of arms sales already have started with Saudi Arabia, UAE, the Russians going in, the French are selling, America is selling to all of the parties. And, you know, and we cannot ever lose sight of how will future generations judge us, that we can't look at this just in the moment, in the political machinations and everything else. We have to look at this and try to, you know, come at it from 10,000 feet and say, I got to look at the consequences. I got to look at how we got here and what does this mean in the future, and how do we protect generations in the future? How do we sustain the U.S.-Israel relationship and not allow it to be damaged? We still have, what, a year and 3 and 4 months with the administration. We have to think about all of the factors and come together, you know, bring them together as we arrive at a decision. The faults with this deal are very clear. People we talk to all over the world and here, you know, they get it. They see the loopholes that are here. Could they have gotten a better deal? I don't know. I didn't participate in the negotiations. Does it pay to highlight it? And does when the National Security Advisor of the President of France was here last week, told members of Congress they should go back and negotiate a better deal, that this is not a good deal? And then, of course, the French ambassador denied it, but I spoke to the members of Congress who heard it, heard him say it.
Yep. Malcolm, I only have a few more moments with you, and I want to make sure I touch another issue. There are those Jews who say, we don't like the deal. At the same time, we're not going to win a congressional fight, and that it would be counterproductive for American Jewry to take part in a losing battle over this issue, and that therefore the American Jewish Community, AIPAC, for example, should not be encouraging American Jewry to lobby legislators to vote against this in Congress, but that in fact we should be thinking of how we can win some kind of concessions from the American administration that would bolster Israel, strengthen Israel militarily, economically, diplomatically, and that a better strategy, strategy-wise, is not to fight this in public, not to make it look like it's a Jewish fight, and not to engage in a fight where you're going to lose.
Right.
I want to know what you advise American Jewry to do now. Do we try to influence Congress, or do we take some other kind of more pragmatic strategy?
Okay. So you asked a lot of questions there, that important points that should be addressed. First of all, I don't know why it should be perceived and presented as a negative when American citizens, whoever they are, engage in the democratic process by getting involved, by meeting their congresspeople, by urging them to take a position. Why is that different than people who advocate for or against gun rights, against all the other issues? They're doing the same thing. Why is it all of a sudden on this issue that we play by different rules? That I think it is the highest calling of American democracy, and what makes it unique is citizen involvement. It says that you, minorities, others, you with views that others don't agree with, have a right to say it. And the consequences, look how many people would have opposed, I don't know, gay rights, and today it's accepted. When they first did it, people opposed it and said, well, you shouldn't expose it, you shouldn't. And whether you're for or against any one of these issues, people have a right, and I would say more, they have an obligation when you have things at stake that are so important, when the principles are at stake, when the security of future generations is at stake. You have an obligation to make your voices heard, even if sometimes it makes people uncomfortable or there's going to be opposition. Out of the debate will emerge an outcome The members of Congress will determine what they're going to do, whether there's one round or the second vote. And then the day after, we have to be prepared for whatever the consequences, whatever the vote was, to deal and look to the future. And the issue you raised about some who advocate, like the Saudis are doing and the UAE is doing with the United States, assessing what additional purchases or weapons they want, etc. Israel will do that, but the Prime Minister is saying, look, this is not the time, because if I do that, then essentially I'm saying I'm already giving up and accepting that this is a done deal, and he's not prepared to do that. Okay, and then he will make the decision, and the President of the United States said, then we'll discuss it afterwards. And, that is a call, the judgment that is made, and the United States-Israel relationship is so deep and so broad, and it's so important to both countries. We can't let it be jeopardized. And just because there's a difference of view, we have to be careful to protect it and to enhance it for the future, not just for the next 18 months of this administration or 15 months, but for decades and the years to come. America is critical to Israel's security, to the Jewish security, the vitality of America, the strength of America, America having strong policies and strong views. And that's why we have a right, and as I said, America demands of us the obligation to speak out, make your voice heard in respectful and positive ways. I think the Jewish community has done it. We have never tried to make this a Jewish issue. We've tried to show what this means to America as a whole. That's why I think the American people are responding. It's not just Jews who are on the Hill. There are Christians and people of every faith, every color, every ethnicity who are lobbying on this issue. And so it is the highest calling of American democracy.
All right, bottom line then for you, if Jews feel that Congress should block this deal, you would encourage them to make their feelings known to Congress.
100%. They're home in the districts now. Go and visit them. Talk to them. Explore the issues with them. Go prepared, though. Study the deal. Study some of the commentaries, some of the different points of view that have expressed it. Listen, if General Dempsey, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, can come out and make the statements he's made about this deal in the last few days, or Admiral Stavridis, who used to be head of the NATO Central Command, I mean, they came out and made critical comments. You see it from many others who are Democrats and who could be associated with the administration or with other administrations. It's not the pro-Iraq crowd that they try to isolate this and say that these are people trying to drive a war. Nobody wants a war. I don't know anyone who's saying that wants to see this driven to a war. We want to see a resolution that leaves the Middle East with the hope of being stable, which means you cannot have an Iran with nuclear weapons. We cannot have an Iran that can continue to intimidate, to expand its influence, to continue to gobble up one country after another, and to become the platform, as they say, for the Middle East. Look at what Khomeini says. Take him seriously. That will be the guide as to what you should do when you meet with your members of Congress.
You know, Malcolm, the late Marvin Hamlish, whose yahrzeit actually was this week, Marvin Hamlish wrote the title song to a James Bond film, and the name of the song is Nobody Does It Better. And I never tire of telling you how appreciative we all are of the work you do on the front lines, defending Israel, Jewish communities throughout the world, representing Jewish interests in Washington. Nobody does it better, Malcolm. I love you very much, and I want you always to be on JBS, and I thank you for always making yourself available to me. I know what your schedule is these days. Don't get tired. Don't give up the fight. We're right behind you. Fair enough?
First of all, the love is mutual, and I'm always happy to do it, and I believe JBS is a great service to the community, vital today more than ever to convey and discuss this issue. And because it's complicated and because it's a complex time and we will face other challenges, it becomes more and more vital. And I hope people take the time to really explore the issues and understand. And I will not get tired. The only thing I've learned is to give up sleep completely. and that's why I watch JBS at 3 o'clock and 2 o'clock.
I love it.
Some of the reruns of the reruns that I get to see.
Yes.
But it's we can't afford to be tired, because when our grandchildren and their grandchildren ask us, what did we do? We're not going to have the excuse to say, I was tired, I couldn't do it.
Exactly. Malcolm, thank you, my friend. We'll talk soon.
My pleasure.
Be well.
Be well.
Malcolm Hoenlein, Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents. We're out of time. My thanks, as always, to Sloan Copeland, Serge Goldberg, Dara Golub, producer Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.